Some time ago, Christian scholar Mike Licona debated skeptic scholar Bart Ehrman on the reliability of the Gospels. In this video, I will analyze and debunk his opening statement. Mike's first claim is that ancient historians were less concerned with precision than modern historians are.
The finest ancient historians, Greek, Roman, and Jewish alike, were committed to accurate reporting and to writing good literature for the reader's benefit. And that often meant reporting in a manner that was less concerned with precision than modern historians have.
If this is true, then it simply makes both the Gospels and other ancient biographies unreliable. Bart Ehrman made this point in another debate.
The problem is that the genre that they're written on are ancient biographies, not modern biographies, and ancient biographies are notoriously historically unreliable.
Think of it this way. If the Bible said that the earth is flat, Mike can't just say, "Oh, but other ancient texts did the same," and pretend this to be an excuse. It would simply mean all ancient texts were mistaken. It would not let the Bible off the hook.
The majority of New Testament scholars now hold that the Gospels share much in common with the genre of ancient biography.
There are texts that belong to the genre of ancient biography and yet contain supernatural events that no historian considers true. Plutarch Lives is an example of this. His biographies include miracles such as talking statues, the divine parentage of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, encounters with supernatural beings, and so on. Another example is Herodotus' Histories, which again narrates several supernatural stories that no one believes to be true.
The Gospels do not hesitate to report embarrassing details, such as Jesus' brothers didn't believe in him during his ministry and that he wasn't aware of the time when he would return to judge the world.
I don't see how these things are super embarrassing. The first item is more a failure of Jesus' brothers, rather than a failure of Jesus himself. Just like most Romans and Jews back then, they simply did not believe. The second item is not embarrassing because what Jesus actually said is that only God knows the time of his return. He is not saying that he himself doesn't know it because he is so dumb or because he forgot it. He is simply not supposed to know that. It's not embarrassing not to know something that you aren't supposed to know.
Hey, Jesus, what time will you return to judge the world? Let me see. Oh man, I think I forgot it. I'm so embarrassed. This is worse than that time I forgot to wear pants.
Now, although their embarrassing nature is not so evident to modern readers, they would have been to the early Christians.
I don't believe this. I would have to see some good evidence for this claim.
At least half of today's critical New Testament scholars agree with the early church tradition that Mark's primary source was Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples.
He said around half scholars believe this. That means around half of scholars don't even agree with it. And half is a lot if you ask me. So this fact is far from established. The problem is that the earliest source that mentions Mark as the author of the first gospel is Papias. And this was done over 30 years after Mark began circulating, which is way too late. And a bit weird if everyone in the church always knew Mark was the author.
The third criterion is the author used good judgment in his use of those sources.
Okay, since we are talking about criteria for historical documents, let's take a look at some of the other criteria. Let's look at the criteria set by Schaeffer in evaluating eyewitness testimony. The most interesting one here is number 4. Do his statements seem inherently improbable, contrary to human nature, or in conflict with what we know? The answer here is a gigantic yes. The claims made in the Gospels are incredibly improbable, if not outright impossible, and conflict with the bulk of our experience, showing that miracles just don't happen. And the last criteria here also apply. Are there inner contradictions in the document? Of course there are. There are a ton of contradictions in the Gospels. In fact, there are so many that Bart's entire argument was based around those. So next time, how about we take all the criteria into account instead of cherry-picking the ones that fit the Gospels?
For when Matthew and Luke use Mark as their source, they stay far more closely to their source than most other historians and biographers do with their sources.
Yeah, because they basically plagiarized Mark and used it verbatim. Couldn't one say that these other historians actually did some of their own research and redacted things in their own words instead of copying things word for word the way Matthew and Luke did?
When ancient documents and inscriptions are considered, the names mentioned in the Gospels and the book of Acts are not only common names of Palestinian Jews of that period and not those of Jews elsewhere, they also appear with roughly the same frequency in the Gospels and the book of Acts that we find in extra-biblical sources.
It turns out that when one correctly analyzes the statistics behind this, the alleged match in names is not that impressive. See Pelagia's video on this.
At the very minimum, this suggests all of the gospel authors, or the sources from which they drew, were acquainted with Palestine around the time of Jesus.
Great, so they were not like from Japan or something. Being from around the region seems like a bare minimum to me, not something that one would consider a great indicator of reliability.
We also know that places mentioned in the Gospels actually existed. For example, Capernaum, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Bethsaida.
That's like someone saying that Spider-Man must be historical because it mentions New York City. It is normal for fiction to refer to real locations.
A number of items about Jesus reported in the Gospels are corroborated by non-Christian, unsympathetic sources, such as Josephus, Tacitus, Lucian, and Bar Serapion.
Actually, what we have from non-Christian sources is very little. Here is most of it. 1. The Testimonium Flavianum, a passage by Josephus that is widely believed by scholars to be a forgery. It is debated whether it is a partial forgery or a complete forgery. 2. A super brief mention by Josephus that simply mentions James, the brother of Jesus. 3. A passage by Tacitus written around 115 CE that mentions Jesus' crucifixion. This is too late and could have been based on what Christians back then were saying. Other sources, such as Bar Serapion, are even later or mention even less about Jesus. So this is not great attestation for someone who is a huge public figure doing all kind of miracles everywhere he went.
Number 6, no more than a very small percentage of items reported by an ancient author are known to be false.
I would counter with this. Every single story with supernatural elements found in ancient texts is automatically regarded as false. If historians find a story about a talking statue, they don't check the text for stuff such as the criteria of embarrassment in order to determine if the statue actually talked or not. They just instantly assume this is a legend. The only exception to this is if the name Jesus appears somewhere in the text, then people lose their minds. Also, how is Mike counting that? Is he only counting biographies which report facts that are known for sure to be false? Or is he also counting the countless myths and legends present in the sacred books of other religions, which are probably false? I think one should also count those, since the skeptics say that some stories in the Gospels belong to this category. So, as you can see, Mike did not make a very strong case for the reliability of the Gospels. Please subscribe to the channel for more content and see you next time.